Okay, let's unpack this because today's stack of documents is honestly it feels less like reading news transcripts and more like the script for a political thriller.
Right.
We are diving into a world where apparently nothing is accidental, where economies don't just crash, they're pushed, and where one man is allegedly sitting at a control panel pulling all the strings.
It is a really dense, high-octane set of papers today. We're looking at the transcripts from a three-part investigation by Glenn Beck titled George Soros, Puppet Master.
Mm-hmm.
And I think before we even start, we have to kind of set the stage for how we're approaching this.
Right. The disclaimer, because this is heavy political content.
Yeah.
And it's very, specific to a certain era of Glenn Beck's broadcasting.
Exactly. Our mission here isn't to validate the politics or, to debunk the claims. We aren't here to say Glenn Beck is right or Glenn Beck is wrong. Our goal is really just to act as guides through the text itself. We are unpacking the narrative, the arguments, and the internal logic Beck uses to build what is essentially a grand unified theory of political influence.
So we're looking at the story he's telling.
Yes.
And the central character of this story is George Soros. And according to these transcripts, he's not just some billionaire donor. He's the puppet master.
That is the core metaphor. Beck frames Soros as this figure in the shadows, manipulating a shadow government to fundamentally transform the United States. And what's fascinating is how he constructs this argument.
Yeah.
It's not just a list of complaints. It's a mix of psychological profiling, economic theory, and a very specific, very dark interpretation of history.
Well, let's start there then with the psychological profile.
Yeah.
Because Beck, he doesn't pull any punches. He tries to get inside Soros's head immediately.
He does.
He paints him as someone with a literal God complex.
He does. And to make it stick, he relies really heavily on Soros's own words. Beck cites these quotes where Soros admits to having messianic fantasies from his childhood.
Right.
There's a specific line Beck quotes from a book, The Alchemy of Finance, where Soros writes, "I fancied myself as some kind of god."
That is a bold thing to say out loud, even for a billionaire.
It is.
Yes.
And for Beck, that's the foundational piece of evidence. He argues that Soros isn't just an investor looking for returns. He sees himself as a creator, someone who wants to reorder the world.
He also mentions that Soros wants his foundation to be the conscience of the world.
Yes.
Which, on a brochure, that sounds philanthropic. But in this context, Beck makes it sound terrifying. Like, who appointed you the conscience of the world?
Precisely. Beck argues that because Soros is an atheist, he's trying to fill that God void himself. He's arguing Soros believes he knows better than the markets, better than voters, better than governments. But the profile gets even darker when Beck digs into Soros's childhood in Hungary.
This was the part of the transcript that really stood out. It's extremely controversial territory. We're talking about 1944, Nazi-occupied Hungary. Soros is 14 years old.
Right. So to survive, Soros, who was born George Schwartz, had to hide his Jewish identity. His father bribed a government official to take him in as his godson.
Yeah.
And part of that official's job was confiscating property from Jewish families who were being sent to the camps, and Soros had to go with him.
But wait, he was 14? He's a kid trying to survive the Holocaust? Doesn't Beck cut him any slack for that?
That's the crucial part. He doesn't. Beck argues that the trauma didn't break him, it made him. He points to a famous 60 Minutes interview where Soros is asked about this.
Okay.
And you'd expect him to say it was traumatic or he felt guilty witnessing it.
But he doesn't say that.
No, Soros describes it as the happiest year of his life. He talks about the exhilaration of survival, his absolute belief in his father's ability to protect him. When he's asked about the confiscation of property, Soros just compares it to markets. If he hadn't been there, someone else would have done it. He says explicitly he felt no guilt.
And Beck takes that lack of guilt and says, see, this is emotional detachment on a massive scale.
Exactly. He frames it as the origin story of a man who can disrupt lives without feeling the human cost. He connects that 14-year-old boy to the adult hedge fund manager. He calls him an economic predator.
Right.
He brings up the quantum fund and the 1992 crash of the British pound to prove the point.
The man who broke the Bank of England. He made $1 billion in one day. But for people who aren't, finance whizzes, how do you actually break a bank like that?
It's essentially a massive gamble against the house. Soros believed the British pound was overvalued, propped up artificially, so he shorted it.
He bet against it.
He bet billions that its value would drop. By dumping so much British currency onto the market, he actually helped cause the value to crash. The British government tried to buy it all back to save it, but they ran out of money.
And they had to devalue the currency.
The British economy tanked, and Soros walked away with $1 billion profit.
So he didn't just predict the crash. His actions helped push it over the edge.
And that is the absolute core of Beck's theory. He argues that Soros doesn't just predict these things, he engineers them. He mentions Malaysia, Thailand, Russia.
Right.
The narrative Beck builds is Soros breaks a country's economy, destabilizes the regime, and then uses his open society foundations to pick up the pieces and rebuild the country in his own image.
Which brings us to the meat of this.
Yeah.
Beck says this isn't just happening somewhere else anymore. He says the target is now the United States.
Yes.
And he outlines a specific strategy. It's not random chaos. It's a playbook.
A 5-step playbook, to be precise. Beck claims this is a repeatable pattern that's been used to topple regimes.
Okay, so if you're Soros and you want to topple a regime like the U.S., you don't just invade. You start quietly. What's the first move?
Step 1 is the shadow government.
Yeah.
You use humanitarian aid as a cover. Beck points to the Open Society Institute, the OSI. On the surface, it's philanthropy funding, education, arts, civil rights. But Beck quotes Soros calling his early work subversive activities.
So the argument is that the OSI acts as a sort of parallel government.
A shadow government. It creates a network of influence inside a country before anyone even realizes what's happening.
Okay, so you're inside the gates, but you need to control what people are talking about.
That's step 2. Control the airwaves. Beck just rattles off this laundry list of funding. $1.8 million to NTR to hire 100 journalists. Massive funding for Media Matters, the Huffington Post.
And the goal is?
The goal is to insulate the agenda and attack any opposition. He specifically mentions attacks on Fox News and, well, Beck himself.
It's so interesting that he views journalism grants not as supporting the press, but as buying narrative control.
In Beck's view, there is no such thing as neutral money. So once you control the story, you move to step 3. Destabilize the state.
This is the economic squeeze.
Yes, the squeeze we talked about. Beck argues that Soros supports massive government spending, like the stimulus bills, specifically to worsen deficits and devalue the currency.
So this connects back to the predator idea. You weaken the dollar, you create a crisis.
Exactly. He links Soros to groups like the Apollo Alliance and the Tides Foundation that help craft these expensive policies. The goal, according to Beck, is to overload the system until it cracks.
And once the system is cracking, you need to make sure the leadership loses legitimacy.
Step 4. Provoke an election crisis. Beck talks about something called the Secretary of State Project.
Okay, what's that?
The idea is to fund the election of the specific officials who certify the votes in key swing states. Beck argues that if you control the referees, you control the game.
Or at least you can create enough doubt to cause a crisis.
A crisis of legitimacy, which leads to the finale. Step 5.
Take power.
Take power. But not through an election, through chaos. Beck predicts massive demonstrations, civil disobedience, riots. He cites student protests in the UK and says that's the model.
So you create so much chaos from the bottom that the government at the top either has to clamp down or completely change.
Yes.
You know, this leads perfectly into this phrase that kept popping up in the transcripts. Beck kept saying that something Van Jones said bothered him.
Top down, bottom up, and inside out.
That's the one.
This is the grand unified theory part. Beck is obsessed with this phrase. He interprets it as a military-style pincer movement against the American citizen.
So let's break that down. Top down refers to what?
Top down is the revolutionaries inside the government, what he calls the shadow party. He argues that radicals have been placed in the White House to change the system from within the corridors of power.
And bottom up?
That's the street-level agitation. Step 5. The riots, the unions, groups like the Ruckus Society, they create the pressure from the street.
So what's inside out?
That's the squeeze on the middle class. The average citizen gets crushed between the government pressure from above and the chaos from below. Beck argues the middle class is being hollowed out so they lose their independence.
And he has a historical analogy for this, right? He brings up Czechoslovakia.
Yes, 1948 Czechoslovakia. Beck claims this is the exact blueprint. The communists pressured the system through parliamentary maneuvers, that's the top-down, and simultaneously organized riots and strikes, that's the bottom-up, and the average Czech citizen didn't really understand what was happening until the country had already flipped.
And Beck is basically screaming that this is happening in America right now.
Right, and to visualize this, He draws this massive web on a chalkboard on his show. It's not just Soros directly doing all this. It's this network of puppets.
The Shadow Party Network.
Yes. He lists them out rapid fire. MoveOn.org, the Tides Foundation, which he describes as like a money laundering funnel to hide where donations are really coming from.
Right.
The Center for American Progress, which acts as the think tank writing the actual policies for the administration.
There was one group in there that seemed a little odd, given Soros's profile. Beck mentions religious groups.
Sojourners and Jim Wallace. Yeah, this is a key point for Beck's audience. He finds it incredibly suspicious that Soros, a self-proclaimed atheist, would fund a Christian organization.
Why?
He argues it's a strategic infiltration of the church to push social justice, which Beck basically equates to big government socialism disguised as theology.
So he sees it as hijacking the church to serve the state.
Exactly. It creates this picture of total encirclement. Media, government, street riots, even your church is compromised.
And speaking of compromise, there was this really weird moment in the transcript, almost cinematic, where Beck talks about a meeting between his executive and a Soros executive.
Oh, the gift. Yes.
Yeah.
This reads like a scene from a mob movie. Apparently, a Soros executive met with Beck's team and gave them a DVD of an old movie, A Face in the Crowd.
I looked this up. It's an Andy Griffith movie, right? But he plays a villain.
He plays a drifter who becomes this famous populist TV personality, but is actually a total fraud who mocks his audience behind their backs.
Wow. So the Soros executive just hands this to Beck's team.
Yeah. As a gift and a warning. The implication was clearly, this is you, Glenn. You're the demagogue who's going to fall.
But Beck, of course, flips it around.
Perfectly. He uses it on air as proof that he's over the target. He frames it as a personal threat from the puppet master himself. It creates this incredible me versus him dynamic.
So if this is the strategy, the 5 steps, the pincer movement, the threats, what's the end game? What does Beck say Soros actually wants?
A new world order. Beck posits that Soros wants the managed decline of the U.S. dollar to bring about the end of American sovereignty. He quotes Soros directly saying, the main obstacle to a stable and just world order is the United States.
So that's the so what of the whole series. The idea borders dissolve and we just become part of some global system.
Correct. Beck argues that for a global, open society to function, the United States cannot remain the dominant superpower. It has to be brought down a peg.
And to get there, the economy has to break.
It has to break. And this is where the transcript gets really alarming for the listener. Beck starts reading off these inflation predictions.
Oh man, these numbers. I wrote them down because they seemed unbelievable. He cites an inflation group predicting future prices.
$77 for a can of coffee.
$77 for Folgers.
$24 for a carton of soy milk. And a Hershey bar.
Wait, don't we?
$115.
$115 for a chocolate bar. That's not just inflation. That's wheelbarrow full of cash territory.
Weimar Republic stuff.
Yeah.
And that is exactly the image Beck wants in your head. He isn't trying to give you a nuanced economic forecast. He is bypassing your logic and hitting your survival instinct.
And he says the dollar is being devalued on purpose.
On purpose to force this transition to a global currency. He tells his audience, you ain't seen nothing yet.
So he scares the living daylights out of you with $77 coffee, and then he pivots to the call to action. What does he tell people to do?
Well, interestingly, his first instruction is a masterclass in building credibility. Don't believe me.
He says that a lot. Do your own homework.
Read the books. Don't take my word for it. It's a rhetorical device that builds trust. He positions himself not as a guru, but as a fellow investigator.
Right.
But then he gives very practical, very domestic advice. Prepping.
Food storage.
Yes. He shares this anecdote about his grandparents canning food in the basement during the Depression. He talks about how terrified he was of the basement as a kid, thinking there were zombies down there. But he realized later it wasn't a dungeon, it was their grocery store.
And he connects that to his own life, saying he wept with relief when he looked at his own year's supply of food.
He frames it as sanity. If you prepare, you don't have to fear the puppet master. He urges the audience to buy food, get out of debt, and be a shelter for others when the collapse happens.
A mix of survivalism and spiritual community building, faith, hope, and charity.
It's a very distinct blend of messages. You have high-level geopolitical conspiracy theory, and then you have buy extra corn, and then you have pray for your neighbors. And that's the Beck formula. He creates a narrative where the listener is surrounded by an illusion a puppet show, and he is the only one pulling back the curtain. He empowers the listener to be the one who knows.
He actually ends the series by nominating the Tea Party as the person of the year, right?
Yeah, he does. He rejects the Time magazine list and says the Tea Party, his audience, are the only ones awake. He tells them the truth is they don't surround us, we surround them.
It's an incredibly empowering message to counter the feelings of powerlessness he just spent hours creating.
Exactly.
So let's zoom out. We've looked at the profile, the 5 steps, the web, the end game. When you look at this entire stack of transcripts, what's the big picture here?
The big picture is that Beck is presenting a world where nothing is accidental. Chaos isn't just chaos, it's orchestrated. Every economic dip, every protest, every election, it's all part of a master plan directed by a single puppet master.
It's so theatrical. I mean, he literally uses a chalkboard and puppet strings on the show.
The visual language is key. He's trying to visualize these invisible networks. But if we connect this to the bigger picture of how we consume information, this series is a perfect example of the great man theory of history.
Or in this case, the evil genius theory.
The evil genius theory, right?
Why do we gravitate toward that, though?
Because it simplifies a complex world. Global economics is messy, it's abstract, it's often totally random. Bad things happen for no good reason. But if you can point to one man, one billionaire, and say, he is doing this, it makes the world understandable. It might make it terrifying, but it makes it intelligible.
It gives you a specific villain to fight.
And a specific way to prepare. It's almost comforting in a dark way. It means someone is at the wheel, even if they're driving off a cliff.
Right. Randomness is terrifying.
A conspiracy is just a puzzle to be solved.
And that leads us to our final thought for you, the listener. In a world that feels increasingly chaotic, does believing in a puppet master actually make us feel safer than accepting that maybe, just maybe, no one is actually in charge?
That's the ultimate question. Is the chaos manufactured, or are we just looking for patterns in the noise?
Something to chew on while you're checking the price of your morning coffee.
Thanks for listening to this deep dive into the Soros files.
We'll see you next time.